Mike Tyson's life outside the ring is just as wild and unpredictable as the bouts that made him a household name. We all know him as the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history, the fearsome, iron-fisted fighter who conquered the ring with unmatched power and determination. But what about his life behind the scenes? The man behind the gloves? Tyson's family life has been anything but ordinary, filled with love, loss, chaos, and unexpected turns that make you question how much of his story was shaped outside the spotlight. At first glance, Tyson's journey to success may seem like one of pure athleticism and grit. He was a prodigy in the ring, a child from a tough neighborhood who turned his life around through boxing. But what we don't often hear about is the deeply personal side of Tyson, how his relationships, his family dynamics, and his own upbringing shaped the man who would become a living legend. And it's not just the accolades and fame that followed him, it's the complicated and sometimes tragic relationships with those closest to him that defined his existence outside the ring. Imagine being thrust into the world of boxing at a young age, where the only thing that matters is your ability to throw a punch. Now picture that same kid being surrounded by a family life filled with turmoil, absence, and instability. From a turbulent childhood that left him searching for love and acceptance, to the complicated relationships with wives, children, and mentors, Tyson's family life is a reflection of both the triumphs and tragedies that followed him for years. But what makes his story even more intriguing is how Tyson, despite all of his successes, struggled with the very thing that many people take for granted, the idea of family. The world saw him as a fighter, a machine built to knock out opponents, but few saw the vulnerable side of Tyson as a father, as a husband, or as a son. The emotional scars of his past, coupled with his celebrity status, created a complex web of relationships that would shape the course of his life in ways that no one, including Tyson himself, could have predicted. Tyson's first marriage to a woman who had come to define a chapter of his life, his love and pain, was only the beginning of a series of ups and downs in his family life. Each relationship, each moment, was a glimpse into the life of a man who, despite all of his fame and fortune, was searching for something more: stability, love, and perhaps redemption. But just when it seemed like Tyson might finally find peace, a new challenge arose, one that would test his limits and push him to places he never thought possible. Behind the scenes, Tyson's story is not just about boxing titles and knockout punches. It's about a man who has fought some of his toughest battles in the realm of personal relationships. And with each new chapter of his family life, he learned something more about himself and the world around him. What was it like for Tyson to juggle fame, success, and family, especially when the pressures of being a global icon weighed down on him like a mountain? But as we dive deeper into Tyson's family life, one thing becomes clear: no matter how hard he tried to protect his loved ones, the spotlight always had a way of creeping in. The fame, the media attention, the constant scrutiny, it all had an impact on his relationships, and it would shape his view of family for years to come. In this journey, we'll explore the ups and downs, the triumphs and struggles that Tyson faced with his family, and how the people closest to him helped him, hurt him, and ultimately shaped the person we know today. From his relationships with his children to the marriages that were filled with passion, conflict, and heartbreak, Tyson's family life is a story that's as full of drama as his career in the ring. But there's one question that lingers as we look into the details of Tyson's family life. What was it really like to be part of the Tyson family? How did his loved ones navigate the pressures of being connected to a man who was both a champion and a deeply flawed individual? With the drama, the chaos, and the moments of redemption, Tyson's family life is a roller coaster of emotions. His story is not just about boxing, it's about the raw and real experiences of a man who has lived through highs and lows, battles and losses, and ultimately discovered what it means to truly love and be loved. But as the story unfolds, Tyson's journey is far from over. There are twists and turns yet to come. Will he ever find peace in his personal life, or will the past continue to haunt him? Stay tuned as we dig deeper into Tyson's family dynamics, his struggles, and the people who have stood by him through it all. The question remains, can a man with so many battles behind him finally find peace within his family? Or is his search for love and stability destined to remain elusive? And just when you think the story is heading toward resolution, Tyson's journey is about to take another unexpected turn, one that will change everything. Because in the Tyson family, just like in the ring, nothing is ever truly over until the final bell rings. Mike Tyson's story is a multifaceted one, with each chapter adding complexity to the man who would become one of the most recognized figures in the world of sports. While the world saw Tyson as an untamed beast in the ring, few understood the challenges that lurked behind closed doors. These were the challenges that affected not just his career, but also the most personal part of his life, his family. The story of Tyson's family is one of contrasts. It's about the vicious strength he exhibited in the ring versus the vulnerability he showed in his personal relationships. For a man who could knock out opponents with one punch, his personal life often felt like a never-ending battle. The family dynamics that shaped his life were tangled with fame, misfortune, and the desire to break free from the cycle of trauma. His childhood, riddled with adversity, set the stage for what would become a life full of unrelenting pressure. His quest for success and recognition was rooted in something deeper, an unspoken need for acceptance, something Tyson never quite felt growing up. Born into a world where survival was the only rule, Tyson was raised by a single mother in the tough neighborhoods of Brooklyn. His father had left before he could even remember, leaving Tyson to grow up with a single mother who struggled to make ends meet. From an early age, Tyson was forced to navigate a world full of danger and hardship. He turned to boxing as a way to escape the violence and chaos that surrounded him. But even within the boxing world, Tyson would soon find that the strength and power he'd cultivated in the ring didn't always protect him from the emotional wounds that plagued him. Tyson's relationship with his mother was complex. She loved him fiercely, but her inability to provide him with a stable and nurturing home led Tyson to seek comfort elsewhere. He found guidance from his boxing coach, QSD D'Amato, who became a father figure to Tyson. D'Amato took Tyson under his wing, teaching him not only the skills to become a champion, but also offering him the kind of stability that had been lacking in Tyson's early life. For a brief time, Tyson felt safe, supported, and believed in. But D'Amato's sudden death in 1985, when Tyson was just 19, shook Tyson to his core. Losing the one person who had truly cared for him pushed Tyson into a spiral of emotional instability. In his personal life, Tyson's first marriage to actress Robin Givens was a public disaster that put his personal issues on full display. Their union seemed destined for trouble from the start. Givens, who was portrayed as a socialite and aspiring actress, quickly found herself in a whirlwind of media attention when the couple's tumultuous relationship began to unravel. The high-profile marriage was filled with accusations of abuse, manipulation, and public scrutiny. Tyson, who had been accustomed to physical confrontations in the ring, found himself in a fight he wasn't prepared for, a fight that took place not with gloves, but with words, cameras, and legal battles. The media frenzy surrounding their divorce painted Tyson as the villain, a monster driven by rage. But behind the public spectacle, there was a man struggling to cope with emotions he had long suppressed. His mental health, once kept in check by the rigid structure of boxing, now began to unravel in the glare of the public eye. The intensity of the divorce and the media attention left Tyson devastated, confused, and increasingly isolated. His personal relationships were quickly becoming as tumultuous as his boxing career. Tyson's relationships with his children were another layer of complexity. As his family life continued to spiral, Tyson became a father to multiple children, but he struggled to build meaningful connections with them. His relationship with his daughter, for example, was marked by absence and emotional distance. Tyson's fame and his commitment to his career often came at the cost of spending time with his children. It wasn't just that Tyson was a busy man, it was that his inability to process his emotions and his past left him incapable of being present in his children's lives. He wanted to be a good father, but his own unresolved trauma was a barrier he couldn't seem to break through. Despite the fractures in his family life, Tyson attempted to rebuild. After his divorce from Givens, Tyson married again. This time, he found a woman who seemed to understand him better. But even then, the scars from his previous relationships continued to haunt him. The demands of his career and his personal battles continued to put a strain on his second marriage. But the real turning point in Tyson's family life came when he began to confront the truth about himself. He started seeking help for his mental health, addressing the emotional wounds that had been inflicted by years of neglect, loss, and violence. The revelation that Tyson was not just a product of his circumstances, but also someone capable of change, was a pivotal moment in his life. He began to understand that the man in the mirror wasn't just a boxer, but a human being with flaws, vulnerabilities, and the capacity for growth. Throughout his journey, Tyson's struggles were not limited to his personal life. His battles in the ring were often overshadowed by his internal conflicts. In the midst of his fight for redemption, Tyson began to realize that his family would play a central role in his healing. He started to open up more to his children, trying to build a better relationship with them, despite the difficulties he had faced in the past. But even then, the challenge of balancing his responsibilities as a father, husband, and public figure was one he could not always manage. Tyson's story is one of persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite the setbacks in his family life, he continued to fight for the chance at redemption. But as the years passed, Tyson found that the real battle was not just in the ring, but in the relationships he had with those closest to him. Every step forward seemed to be met with new challenges that Tyson could not avoid, no matter how hard he tried. Now, as Tyson looks back on his tumultuous family life, he must come to terms with the mistakes he has made, the people he has hurt, and the future that lies ahead. The struggle to maintain a healthy family dynamic continues, but Tyson remains determined to break free from the chains of his past. And though the road ahead is uncertain, there is a sense that Tyson's fight for family, love, and healing has just begun. The unresolved tensions from Tyson's past are still present, but there is hope. He now faces the possibility of rebuilding, of finding peace in his personal life, and reconciling the contradictions that have shaped him. Will Tyson finally find the balance he has long sought? Will he be able to repair the damage done to his relationships and provide a stable environment for his children? Or will his past continue to define him, keeping him in a constant state of conflict? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, Tyson's story is far from over, and the battle for his family's future is one that will keep him fighting for years to come. Mike Tyson's journey through life was one of continuous turbulence, and it wasn't just confined to the boxing ring. The tension in his personal life was as palpable as the pressure in the squared circle. He was a man constantly at war with himself, trying to reconcile the man he had become in the public eye with the man he was in his private life. While the world cheered for him as the unstoppable force in the ring, Tyson found that his most challenging battles were being fought away from the cameras, in the spaces where no one could see the cracks. Tyson's relationship with his family, especially his children, was perhaps the greatest reflection of this internal battle. The distance between him and his firstborn, for example, had long been a point of conflict. His daughter, like his sons, had felt the sting of his absence. Tyson's career, once the focal point of his life, had left little room for those closest to him. Though Tyson's love for his children was undeniable, it was often overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of success and his failure to truly understand the importance of emotional presence. There were moments where Tyson would try to bridge the gap, especially with his sons. He would offer them wisdom, guidance, and even attempt to teach them the value of hard work. But his attempts were always undercut by the same issues he had been dealing with his entire life: anger, pride, and the weight of unresolved trauma. As much as he wanted to be a good father, he often found himself slipping back into old habits. The walls he had built around himself to protect his vulnerability only seemed to grow higher and thicker as time passed. One of the most poignant moments in Tyson's struggle was the way he reacted to his sons' attempts to carve out their own paths in life. Tyson, who had faced the harshest realities from a young age, couldn't understand why his children would want anything other than the success and fame he had achieved. It was as though he couldn't see beyond the lens of his own experience. He had fought for everything he had, and yet, the way his children viewed success seemed different. They didn't carry the same desperation he had. Tyson, despite everything he had gone through, still couldn't fathom that they didn't need to endure the same battles he had fought. Tyson had always been a fighter, but as his story continued to unfold, it became clear that his most important battles were the ones that took place outside the ring. And as the story progressed, it was evident that Tyson had yet to fully come to terms with the demons that had haunted him for most of his life. His family life, once marked by turmoil and chaos, was still a battleground one, where victory was uncertain, but the fight for peace would continue. And in the end, the question remained, could Mike Tyson ever truly reconcile with his past, and in doing so, heal the rift in his family? Only time would tell. The days continued to stretch on, and the cracks in Tyson's world grew ever more visible. It seemed like he was constantly teetering on the edge of something. His attempts to make peace with the past had become a never-ending cycle, filled with broken promises and half-hearted efforts. Each step forward was met with another obstacle, a reminder of the person he used to be and the person he desperately wanted to become. Tyson's relationship with his children remained a bittersweet struggle. While he did his best to show up for them, to be there for the moments that mattered, it felt like there was always something missing. He could never quite reach them in the way he wanted to. He found himself repeating the same mistakes over and over again, unable to break free from the patterns that had been set in motion so many years ago. In his quieter moments, Tyson would reflect on how different things might have been if he had made different choices, if he had spent more time with his children, or if he had let go of the anger and pain that seemed to guide his every move. But those reflections were often fleeting, lost in the whirlwind of his life. The more he tried to grasp the elusive peace he so desperately sought, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. His second marriage, though quieter than his first, was no less complicated. Tyson's wife was a constant source of support, yet there was a palpable distance between them. He loved her, but the emotional walls he had built were insurmountable. She often found herself questioning whether the man she married was truly the man standing before her, or if the ghosts of Tyson's past had made it impossible for him to truly be present. There were moments of tenderness, fleeting moments when Tyson would let his guard down. His vulnerability, however, was often short-lived, quickly replaced by the sharp edges of the man who had learned to fight for everything, to protect himself from the world. The emotional weight of his past continued to press on him, and it became clear that he would never fully escape it. His marriage, like his relationship with his children, seemed to be caught in a constant state of tension, of unfinished business that neither party knew how to resolve. As Tyson tried to navigate the tangled web of his family life, the public's fascination with him only grew. His every move was watched, analyzed, and dissected. The media had long since moved on from his boxing career, but they remained fixated on the man behind the gloves. Tyson's life, with its highs and lows, was a never-ending source of drama, and the world seemed to be waiting for the next chapter. But there were moments when Tyson began to question whether the world's obsession with him was a blessing or a curse. He had spent so much of his life in the public eye. So much of his identity was wrapped up in the persona he had crafted that it became hard to distinguish where he ended and the world's perception of him began. The pressure, the constant scrutiny, began to feel like a weight he could no longer bear. The tension in his life, the unresolved conflicts with his family, his battles with himself, all seemed to be building to a breaking point. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, a feeling that something had to give. Tyson knew it, his family knew it, and the people who had stood by him for years knew it. The path to redemption, to healing, seemed so clear yet so impossibly distant. Each day felt like a new challenge, a new test of his will and his ability to change. And then one night it happened. A conversation that would set the stage for everything to come. Tyson sat down with his children, a rare moment of calm amidst the chaos. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no tension in the air, no walls between them. It was just the three of them, father and children, sitting together, talking. The conversation started simply enough, a quiet exchange of words. But soon, it began to shift. His children, no longer the wide-eyed kids who had once looked up to him with admiration, spoke to him with a raw honesty that Tyson hadn't been ready for. They told him about the pain, the disappointment, the years of feeling like they didn't matter. They spoke of how they had longed for him to be more than just the boxer, more than just the man the world saw on TV. They wanted him to be their father, to be present, to be real. Tyson sat there listening to them, each word cutting deeper than any punch he had ever taken. He had always thought he was doing enough, that the money, the fame, the material things he provided would be enough. But now, as he listened to their words, he realized how wrong he had been. The things that truly mattered, love, time, attention, were the things he had neglected. He had been so consumed with his own demons, with trying to escape the man he had become, that he had missed the very thing that could have saved him. The conversation was raw, emotional, and, at times, uncomfortable. But it was also necessary. For the first time, Tyson felt the weight of his mistakes, the depth of the chasm that had grown between him and the people he loved most. The walls he had spent so many years building began to crumble, and for the first time in a long while, Tyson allowed himself to feel vulnerable. He didn't know if it was too late, if he could ever fully make amends, but in that moment, he knew he had to try. As the conversation ended, Tyson left the room feeling a mix of emotions: guilt, shame, but also hope. For the first time in years, he felt like there was a possibility of change, that maybe he could heal the wounds he had caused. But he also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The tension that had been building for so long was still there, simmering beneath the surface. There were no quick fixes, no easy answers. But for the first time in a long while, Tyson was ready to face whatever came next. The real question was, could he sustain this change? Could he truly rebuild his relationships and find peace? Or was he destined to continue battling the same demons, forever stuck in the cycle of his past? And as the story unfolded, it became clear that Tyson's family life was far from simple, far from resolved. The true test was yet to come, and the audience was left wondering, would Tyson finally be able to heal the wounds of his past, or would the legacy of his troubled family life continue to haunt him? The answer, as always, lay in the ring of his own heart. The weeks following that conversation were filled with moments of clarity and confusion. Tyson had done his best to honor the promises he made to his children. He attended more family gatherings, showed up for the small moments that meant so much, and worked hard to prove that he could be more than the fighter, more than the headline-grabbing icon. But something was still amiss. A gnawing sensation lingered, a feeling that, despite his best efforts, he was walking a tightrope. Every step forward felt like it could be his last. He was unsure if it was the weight of his past, the relentless media scrutiny, or simply the fragile state of his relationships, but the cracks were starting to show. Tyson's wife had been supportive, yes, but there was a growing unease in their home. The conversations were often quiet and heavy, and she, too, began questioning whether their love could survive the ghosts of Tyson's past. She had always been by his side, but now she found herself retreating into herself, unsure if the man she had married was still the same or if he was something entirely different, someone she didn't recognize. Tyson's children, too, struggled with their own feelings. While they had opened up to him, the rawness of their emotions had started to fester. They still carried the scars of their childhood, the years of growing up in the shadow of his fame and violence. It wasn't just about spending more time with them or showing up to their events. It was about healing deep wounds that ran far beyond what Tyson had initially realized. The journey he had started was no longer just about reconnecting. It was about undoing years of damage, and he wasn't sure if he had the strength to carry the weight of it all. Then came the phone call that shook everything. The world had been watching Tyson for decades, and his every move had been documented, scrutinized, and analyzed. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold. The call was brief, disorienting. His former trainer, the man who had helped him rise to the top, had fallen ill. The news was devastating. Tyson had been so focused on his own personal battles, so caught up in rebuilding his life, that he had lost touch with the very people who had been with him during his most pivotal moments. The loss of his trainer felt like a betrayal of sorts. As Tyson navigated the whirlwind of emotions brought on by this sudden tragedy, he found himself questioning everything. Had his obsession with redemption and healing caused him to lose sight of the people who truly mattered? Was this another manifestation of his inability to hold on to the most important relationships in his life? The guilt weighed heavily on him, but there was something deeper at play. As Tyson grappled with the grief of losing his mentor, another revelation shook him to his core. His mentor's death was not a simple matter of old age or illness. It was linked to something far darker. Tyson began to uncover evidence suggesting that his mentor had been involved in shady dealings, perhaps even tied to the very underworld Tyson had once been a part of. It seemed unfathomable. The man who had guided him, who had instilled discipline and focus, was now part of a world Tyson had worked so hard to escape. This new truth twisted his perception of the man he had trusted for so long. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. Tyson wanted to grieve, wanted to honor his mentor, but he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that something more sinister had been going on behind the scenes. This realization began to gnaw at him, driving a wedge between his personal life and the world he had known. It was a cruel irony after spending years trying to distance himself from the violence and corruption that had defined his boxing career. He was now faced with the painful truth that his mentor, the man who had been his guiding light, had been tied to that very same darkness. How could Tyson reconcile his need for redemption with the harsh reality that the people he had trusted were far from blameless? The stakes were rising, and Tyson's family began to feel the strain. He had been trying so hard to rebuild, but the weight of these revelations made it even more difficult to keep the facade intact. His wife, already weary from the emotional roller coaster of his past, now found herself questioning everything. Could Tyson truly change? Could he ever escape the grip of the past, or was he destined to remain in the same cycle of destruction? The tension between them, once quiet but steady, had become unbearable. Her own struggles fighting to hold the family together were no longer as silent. She demanded answers from Tyson, pushed him harder than she ever had before. She wanted the truth. She needed to know if the man she loved could finally break free from the web of lies, betrayal, and violence. Tyson felt cornered. The pressure was mounting from all sides. He had already taken on the challenge of rebuilding his relationship with his children, trying to right the wrongs of his past. But now this new crisis, one he had never anticipated, was threatening to tear everything apart. And he was left wondering, was this his fate? To be haunted by the shadows of his past, no matter how hard he tried to move forward. The situation reached a boiling point when Tyson's former trainer's connection to the underworld was revealed publicly. The media, ever eager for sensationalism, wasted no time in turning this newfound scandal into the latest headline. Tyson's every move, his every word, was now being scrutinized more than ever. The public, who had once adored him, now began to question his integrity. Was he just another victim of the violence and corruption that had tainted his past, or had he been complicit all along? As the walls seemed to close in around him, Tyson's family life became more fractured. His children, who had made so much progress in their relationship with him, now found themselves caught in the fallout. They were exposed to the public's judgment, to the cruel commentary that came with their father's name. The last thing they needed was to be dragged into the same darkness Tyson had spent so many years trying to escape. Tyson's resolve was tested like never before. With every new revelation, with every new betrayal, he felt his world slipping further out of control. The tension that had been building for so long was reaching its peak. Every choice he made now felt like it would determine his future, not just his own, but the future of his family. Could he withstand the pressure, or would he crumble under the weight of his past? The question lingered in the air, unanswered and hanging heavily between him and the people who mattered most. The stakes had never been higher. Tyson's journey toward redemption, once hopeful, now seemed more uncertain than ever. Each new twist in the story only deepened the mystery, pulling him deeper into a world he had never wanted to be a part of again. And as the story continued to unfold, it was clear that the resolution was far from simple. Tyson was on the edge, with no clear path forward, and the world was watching to see if he could finally break free from the chains of his past, or if the past would, once again, claim him. The tension had reached its breaking point. Tyson's world had been shaken to its core by the unraveling of secrets and the harsh reality of the life he had tried so hard to leave behind. His family, his relationships, his very identity, all were being tested in ways he had never anticipated. It was as though every step forward was met with another setback, and for a brief moment, Tyson found himself doubting whether redemption was even possible. His past, once an enemy he thought he had outsmarted, had now become an inevitable force, dragging him back into its grasp. But in the depths of this turmoil, Tyson made a choice. He realized that if he was ever going to truly break free from the weight of his past, he needed to confront it, head-on, not just the underworld ties, not just the betrayal, but the very person he had been. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding behind a facade of strength and invincibility. It was time for honesty, time for true accountability. And so, in a bold and vulnerable move, he sat down with his family, his wife, his children, the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, and laid everything bare. The conversation was raw. Every word felt like it carried the weight of a lifetime of regrets, every silence between them, a reflection of the hurt and uncertainty they all had felt. Tyson confessed his deepest fears, not just about his past, but about the kind of man he had become. He acknowledged the mistakes, the lies, and the emotional scars he had left in his wake. And in a surprising turn, he didn't just apologize, he asked for forgiveness. But most importantly, he offered a vision for the future. A future where he could make amends, where he could truly be the man his family needed him to be. He wasn't asking for everything to be fixed overnight. He wasn't asking for them to forget. He was simply asking for the chance to prove that change was possible. His family listened in silence. The air was thick with emotions, but something shifted. The hardened walls, which had once kept them apart, began to crack. His wife, who had been so torn by the unfolding drama, took a deep breath and slowly reached for his hand. Their children, who had often felt like strangers to him, saw something different in their father, a sincerity that had been missing for so long. They were still cautious, still uncertain, but in that moment, they understood that Tyson was fighting for them, not just for himself. But the story didn't end there. The external pressure, the judgment from the public, had been relentless. The media hadn't stopped their scrutiny, the rumors hadn't ceased, and the public had kept watching. Tyson knew that no matter what he did, there would always be people who doubted him, people who would never let him forget the mistakes he had made. And yet, in an unexpected turn of events, the public opinion began to shift. His confession, his willingness to open up, was not just seen as an admission of guilt, it was seen as a sign of growth. The story of the fallen boxer, trying to redeem himself, resonated with millions. His vulnerability became his strength. People didn't just see Tyson as the former champion who had lost it all, they saw him as a man who was striving to build something better. It was the most human thing he had done in years, and it captured the hearts of many. And then, just as it seemed that Tyson was finally on the path to healing, another twist rocked his world. It came in the form of a letter. It was from his former trainer's lawyer, a letter Tyson had never expected to receive. Inside, he learned that his mentor's ties to the underworld were far deeper than anyone had imagined. The revelations were shocking, but the most jarring part was this: his mentor had left him a portion of his estate. Tyson had been named a beneficiary, a gesture that left him speechless. The letter didn't just speak of financial inheritance, it spoke of legacy. It spoke of the shared journey Tyson and his trainer had taken together, of the bond they had formed despite the darkness that had surrounded them. This news, though unexpected, added another layer to Tyson's journey. It forced him to confront not just the death of his mentor, but the complex nature of their relationship. He had always believed that his mentor's involvement with the underworld was a betrayal of the principles he had been taught. But now, with the letter in hand, he realized that the mentor had, in his own way, tried to guide Tyson out of that life. It wasn't just about boxing, it was about redemption, even if the man hadn't been able to fully escape his own demons. Tyson, in turn, had to make a choice. Would he accept this gift, this legacy, and carry it forward? Or would he refuse it, rejecting the past in favor of forging a completely new future? In that moment, Tyson understood that the story wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it, to take the lessons and move forward without being shackled by regret. He didn't have to be defined by his past mistakes, and he didn't have to let his mentor's actions control his future. He could still choose who he wanted to be. And so, with the weight of the decision ahead of him, Tyson took a step forward. He chose to accept his mentor's legacy, but on his own terms. He would not allow it to define him, but he would allow it to guide him, teaching him that even the darkest of pasts could lead to a brighter future if one was willing to face it with courage and humility. Tyson's family life began to heal. The rift between him and his wife slowly began to close as they worked together to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. The relationship with his children, too, grew stronger. They saw the man he was becoming, not the man he had been, and they stood by him, cautiously but hopefully. Tyson knew the road to redemption was long, but for the first time in years, he felt that the journey was possible. The past was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer held the same power over him. As Tyson reflected on everything he had been through, the losses, the struggles, the personal battles, he realized that this was his true victory. It wasn't about the championships, the fame, or the glory. It was about finding peace within himself, about rebuilding the relationships that mattered, and about showing his family that he could be the man they had always wanted him to be. The final twist wasn't in a knockout punch or a championship win. It was in the realization that the real fight was always within. I'm unable to write that many words in a single response, but I can still continue the story for you. Here's a continuation that wraps up the narrative, while maintaining suspense and engagement. Tyson's acceptance of his mentor's legacy brought him closer to his family, but it also placed him at a crossroads. The weight of his decisions was not easily shaken, and although he was no longer the man he once was, the path ahead still felt uncertain. The world saw him as a fallen hero, trying to rise again, but there was no escaping the knowledge that the journey would always be complex. The question Tyson often found himself grappling with was not whether he could change, but whether he could be forgiven for all the wrongs he had done. In the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, Tyson felt the full force of the legacy he carried. He no longer looked at his past as a burden, but as a set of lessons that shaped him in ways he had never fully understood before. He had hurt so many people along the way: his family, his friends, his fans, and he couldn't undo the damage. Yet, he also realized that redemption didn't require perfection. It required effort, honesty, and humility. With that understanding, Tyson began to put the final pieces of his broken relationships back together. He started with his children. They had been the ones who had suffered the most from his absence, from the emotional scars left by his unpredictable behavior. The years of instability had left a mark, but the healing had already begun. It was a slow process, but with each small gesture, each genuine conversation, Tyson began to rebuild the trust he had lost. There were no grand gestures, no heroic comebacks, just the steady, quiet work of being present. His wife, too, began to see the man Tyson was becoming. She had been hurt, betrayed by his actions in the past, but over time, she began to understand that the man sitting before her was not the same one who had walked out of their home all those years ago. He was someone who had acknowledged his faults, who was actively working to change. It wasn't easy. Old wounds didn't heal quickly, but their love, though scarred, had a foundation strong enough to rebuild upon. Tyson knew that they would never fully erase the past. But what they could do was forge a future that was rooted in understanding and forgiveness. It was never about forgetting the pain, but about choosing to move forward despite it. And as Tyson took these small steps towards healing, he began to understand the depth of the love and loyalty his family had always shown him. Meanwhile, the public's perception of Tyson began to shift. They saw the rawness in his apology, the sincerity in his attempts to make things right. He was no longer the man who had fought only for titles and fame. He was someone who fought for redemption, for reconciliation with the people he had hurt. This wasn't the sensational Tyson the media had once fed on, but a more nuanced, vulnerable version, someone who wasn't afraid to face the truth of his past. The public, as fickle as they were, began to see him not as a fallen hero, but as a human being struggling to right his wrongs. As the months passed, Tyson's life began to stabilize. He spent more time with his family, focusing on the small moments that were once so easily overlooked. He found joy in the simplest things: taking his children to the park, having dinner with his wife, watching the world go by without the constant pressure of media attention or public expectation. But even as he built his new life, he knew that the past would always be a part of him. He wasn't running from it anymore. Instead, he was learning to live with it. One day, as Tyson sat on the porch of his home, looking out over the quiet landscape, he realized something. He had fought many battles in his life, inside the ring and out, but the greatest battle had always been the one within. The journey he had taken to get to this point had been filled with pain and mistakes, but it had also been a journey of growth and understanding. Tyson had finally come to terms with the fact that perfection was never the goal. The goal was simply to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and to keep fighting for the things that truly mattered. It wasn't the flashy return to the ring that would define him now, nor the media's adoration. What mattered most was the life he was rebuilding with his family, the peace he had found in accepting his imperfections, and the realization that his greatest triumph was not in titles or fame, but in the quiet moments of redemption. In the years that followed, Tyson continued to face challenges, but none as daunting as the ones he had already overcome. He became a mentor to others, offering guidance to those who struggled with the same demons that once consumed him. He spoke openly about his past, about the mistakes he had made, and about the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions. His story became one of hope, not because he had achieved something extraordinary, but because he had shown that change was possible, no matter how far one had fallen. And so, Tyson's story came full circle. The man who had once been lost to the darkness of his own mind and past had found his way back to the light. He wasn't perfect, he never would be, but he had found something far more meaningful: peace. His family had healed, his relationships had mended, and he had finally found a place where he could be at peace with himself. He had fought many battles, but the greatest victory was not in the ring, it was in the way he had reclaimed his life. Tyson's journey may have been marked by darkness, but it was also defined by his resilience, his ability to rise again, and his unyielding determination to be better. His legacy was no longer just that of a boxer, but of a man who had learned that the most important fight was the one for his own soul. And in the end, it was that fight that made all the difference. As Tyson sat there on the porch, looking out at the world he had come to know so intimately, he felt a quiet sense of pride. He had done it. Not just for himself, but for the people who had always believed in him, for the family who had stood by him when it seemed like there was no way out. Tyson had not just found redemption, he had found his way home,